There we go. Okay, so good morning, everyone. And I thought today that we would talk about civil. Just one second, somebody's coming in. So let's just let this person come in. There we go. Okay, so I thought today that we would talk about civil discourse, something that has been for the past 5 years has been an issue in our society, and I would think around the world, that as the years have progressed since 5 years ago, our patience for people who have different opinions than us has worn thin, and that if we are on social media, which thankfully I'm not really, I'm on Facebook, but that's it. I don't bother with Twitter, and on Facebook I only post kind of good and welfare kind of things. I don't get into heated debate. And when somebody, my so-called friends, when one of my friends was stating a pretty intense opinion, political opinion, I decided to silence that friend. So I think it has allowed me to stay sane and healthy the past few years. But I think a lot of research has been done on the added stress and anxiety that people feel as a result of being on social media, especially kids, that is middle school and high school kids, intense amount of stress and anxiety and mental health issues as a result of being on social media. So I recommend highly not being on social media, and this is where not being tech savvy comes in handy for our mental health. But when it comes to, so because the the argument in society and the impatience that people of one opinion have with the people on the other side, it has led to those in the Jewish community to teach about what it means to have civil discourse. And are we obligated to be civil towards someone who has a different opinion than us? So it led, one of the places I go to for classes and workshops is the Hartman Institute. So many of you know that I was involved in a program with the Shalom Hartman Institute, which is based in Jerusalem. They have a program, an intense 3-year program where it's for rabbis only, of all denominations. Rabbis apply to be in Israel for 3 weeks in July and a week in the wintertime, and there were Zoom classes in between. And this is for 3 years, and it was a great program. It got me to go to Israel. It happened during the time that the shul was without a home for those 5 years between after we sold the building in White Oak and before this building was completed. Those 5 years were a very stressful time. And this 3-year Hartman program, it allowed me to kind of escape that stress and have an opportunity to study and to meet new colleagues. So I continue to take classes with Hartman. Anybody can take classes with them. They have programs for lay people, programs for leaders in the Jewish community. They have programs for rabbis and cantors too. Just Google Hartman Institute and you'll see a whole variety of programs that they have. So really, really good stuff. So the week that lockdown occurred because of the pandemic, back in 2019, one of the scholars taught a session at the Federation in Rockville for rabbis. And so the Hartman has partnered with federations across the country to provide scholars and classes to the community. So this is a class. These are the sources and then the notes I took on a class titled it's a series, Our Values, Our Aspirations. The scholars, Christine Hayes, who's a scholar of Jewish studies at Yale University, and it was titled How to Answer a Fool. Okay, so that's one way to approach the idea of how to engage in civil discourse. Okay, so let's just go right into it, and I'm going to share with you verbally a couple of the sources that Dr. Hayes shared with us. And there's this interesting source from the Book of Proverbs. So the Book of Proverbs in the Bible is ascribed to King Solomon. In fact, 3 books in the Bible are ascribed to Solomon. You have Proverbs, you have Song of Songs, and you have Ecclesiastes. So those 3 books are ascribed to him, written at various stages of his life. So Song of Songs, the rabbis say Solomon wrote in his youth because it's a love song, an 8-chapter love poem to one of his many lovers. Proverbs was written maybe in middle age, what he has learned so far in his life. And these are, it's many chapters long, and I believe 31 chapters long, with statements about how we should act and what we should aspire to in moral, ethical, religious behavior. And then Ecclesiastes was written, according to the rabbis, by Solomon near the end of his life, kind of looking back on his life, what he has learned, and kind of a philosophy, a 12-chapter philosophy of life. So, so here, the Book of Proverbs, I tell you, this is just as a conservative rabbi, Proverbs, I had 1 week on the Book of Proverbs in all my years of rabbinical school. There was a survey class that we took one semester on the section of the Bible known as the writings, right? So the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew acronym for it is Tanakh. The Tuf is Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The Nun is Nevi'im, the books of prophets. So that goes from Joshua all through the prophets. And then the Cha of Tanakh is Ketuvim, that is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, the 5 scrolls, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, all those books. So the books of the writings in one semester. So there's 1 week on Proverbs. Okay, so it's assumed. So even if I had gone to yeshiva, not just Jewish day school, I went to a pluralistic Jewish day school for K through 12, except for 7th grade, just where we were living at the time. There was no day school option for 7th grade. That was my only year that I was in public school. Everything else was Jewish day school all the way through. And we did not study the Book of Proverbs in my Jewish day school education. We studied Torah, we studied a couple books of prophets, but never did we get into Proverbs. So if I had gone to yeshiva, probably I would have studied it, but not too intently. So for the rabbis, it's understood that people read it, but it's also understood that you don't spend that much time with it. So the 1 chapter from the Book of Proverbs that we all might be familiar with is the woman of valor. So that's chapter 31, Eshet Chayil, written in alphabetical order, all these great things about this woman of valor. Okay, so that's the most famous thing from the Book of Proverbs. So here, Christine Hayes quotes for us two verses in chapter 26 that seem contradictory. Verse 4 in chapter 26 of Proverbs, answer not a fool according to their folly, lest you also be like them. Okay, so seems pretty clear. A fool says something to you. You don't have to talk back. And in fact, you shouldn't talk back, because if you talk back, you'd be going down to their level. You'd be a fool yourself if you engage in conversation with a fool. Okay, so that seems pretty clear. That's sentence 4. But verse 5, the very next sentence says, answer a fool according to their folly, lest they be wise in their own eyes. So now it says you should talk back to a fool, because if you don't, they might think that they're smarter than you because you didn't engage in conversation. So what is it? Are you supposed to answer the fool or not answer the fool? So the rabbis, in discussing this, said in the Babylonian Talmud, in the tractate Shabbat, they thought that the Book of Proverbs shouldn't be in the Bible because it contains contradictory statements, just like this one that we just had. What is it? Do you answer the fool or do you not answer the fool? So they explained this. How could it be that you should answer the fool? And how could it be that you shouldn't answer the fool? It could be based on, and they say this, answer, there is no difficulty. That, in other words, it shouldn't look contradictory. It shouldn't be understood as contradictory statements. One, where you should not answer is, refers to matter, where you should answer, you should answer a fool when it comes to matters of Torah, and you should not answer the fool when it comes to ordinary matters. So if a fool is talking to you about non-Torah matters, then just walk away. But a fool is talking to you about Torah matters, Torah subjects, then you should engage in conversation. Apparently, according to the rabbis, you want to make sure that the fool doesn't apply foolish interpretations to the Torah. So answer a fool about aspects of Torah, ignore the fool when it comes to matters of secular matters. Okay, so that this is an initial conversation about how we are supposed to engage in civil discourse. So this source suggests when it comes to secular matters and a fool talks to you, so now it's clear that the fool is a fool according to our opinion of that person. There is no objective standard by which everybody would agree necessarily that that person is a fool, right? So let me just say this, and I'm just giving an example. I might think that a person who follows blindly the statements of former President Trump would be a fool. Okay, I don't want to engage in conversation about this. I'm just giving an example. My opinion would be that that person is a fool. And therefore, according to this, I should not engage in conversation. And so I see on social media, or I hear about on social media, what happens when people try to engage such people, that is, people who blindly follow the opinions of former President Trump. I see what happens when one tries to engage in conversation. Okay, now, those very same people could think that I'm a fool because I don't subscribe to particular conspiracy theories that such people have. So Congresswoman Marjorie Greene from Georgia, who believes that there are lasers in outer space run by Jews that started the forest fires in California, she thinks that we're all fools for not subscribing to her opinions or to her supposed facts about this. Now, I cannot say that there are objective standards of definition that everyone would agree that Marjorie Greene is a fool. So, because it's clear that she has a following. And are her followers fools? I don't know. So what I'm suggesting is the idea of calling someone a fool is a subjective opinion, not an objective opinion. The rabbis, I think, thought that there was an objective standard by which everyone would agree that so-and-so is a fool. Okay? And it's possible that the author of Proverbs also thought that there was an objective standard for someone who is a fool. Now, when it comes to knowledge of Torah, I think knowledge, achieving a certain knowledge level is objective. There are objective standards, right? Someone who has a Hebrew school education only, someone who has a Jewish day school education only, someone who pursued Jewish studies in college, someone who received a Jewish studies degree in college, someone who received a PhD in Jewish studies, someone who became a rabbi. Okay, so you have different levels of Jewish knowledge, and I would think that someone who doesn't even have a Hebrew school education might be considered a fool in this category. So now fool is a derogatory statement, right? It's an insult. So I think the objective is an ignoramus. So an ignoramus is not necessarily a nice term to call someone, but it's more of an objective way to describe someone's level of knowledge. And I think that could possibly be how the rabbis are understanding fool in this category. So if a fool, that is someone who has no Jewish background, states an opinion about Torah, then the rabbis are saying that we are obligated to engage in conversation with them so that we enlighten them, and so that they don't go on and continue their foolish or lack of knowledge opinion about that particular Jewish subject. Okay, so engaging in conversation with a fool, I think if so far could be understood engaging in conversation with someone who lacks knowledge. So someone who's not necessarily foolish, someone who just happens to be uninformed. Okay, so we have to be careful with the English translation. We also have to be careful with the Hebrew word itself. The Hebrew in the Book of Proverbs is kasil. So kasil is sometimes a fool in terms of a derogatory sense, an insult, or it could be an objective of someone who has not achieved a certain level of knowledge. Okay, everybody catching my drift here, understanding so far? Any thoughts or comments so far? Okay, so I want to go on to another source that the rabbis bring in terms of engaging in conversation. So if If we're engaging in conversation, then how do we do so? So there is this source. This is from also Talmud Shabbat, the very same section that's describing the Book of Proverbs and the contradictory statements in it. Goes on to tell a couple of stories about rabbis engaging in conversations with so-called fools. Okay, so our rabbis taught a person should always be patient like Hillel and not impatient like Shammai. Okay, so there are stories about Hillel and Shammai, two great rabbis around the time a couple of decades before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So the 1st century CE, but they lived around the mid-century. The temple was destroyed in 70. They lived around the year 40 or so in the 1st century. So they were the great rabbis of their generation. Most of what we learn in the Talmud in terms of whose opinion to follow follows Hillel. There are few and far between time that we follow Shammai. Most of the time we follow Hillel, and Hillel is raised up as this great, kind, compassionate rabbi. Shammai, not so much. So here's an example. Hillel was known to be patient. Shammai was not. It once happened that two men made a wager with each other, saying, "He who goes and makes Hillel angry shall receive 400 zuz." So they made a bet with each other. It's like Jules and I were saying, I bet I can get Hillel to be angry with me. And Jules says, I bet you can't. Okay, let's put money on that bet, Jules. And they put money on it, 400 zuz. So to get a sense of how much 400 zuz is, Chad Gadya, the song at the end of the Seder, you're buying a baby goat for 2 zuz. When in the Ketubah, a never married woman, her price is 200 zuz. Okay, so this is double the price of getting married. So it's an exorbitant sum. So it would be as if, we're two wealthy people making a wager. It's like, there are commercials on TV now for these sports betting. And one of these commercials has Ben Affleck and somebody else in a limousine putting down a random bet. So it's like a celebrity, two celebrities making a bet with each other. 400 zuz. It's a tremendous amount of money. So they're betting, I bet I can make Hillel angry. The other guy saying, no, I bet you can't. Okay, said one, I'll go and incense him. Let's see if I can do it. That day was Shabbat Eve. So it was Friday afternoon, and Hillel was washing his head. Okay, so is that something that you do only on Friday afternoons to wash your head? Doesn't matter. You can look up another time, but this is what he was doing. He was busy getting ready for Shabbat. Okay. Now, frankly, when I'm getting ready for Shabbat, my initial reaction when somebody calls me is, don't they know it's Friday afternoon? Why is someone bothering me on Friday afternoon? Okay, that's my initial reaction. Hopefully, when I answer the phone, I don't maintain that attitude in conversation with the person who's calling. So he's washing his head. He's washing up, getting ready for Shabbat. And so the one, he went, passed by the door of his house and called out, is Hillel here? Is Hillel here? Thereupon he, that is Hillel, robed and went out to him saying, my son, what do you require? Okay, so he's in the middle of getting ready for Shabbos. Somebody's at his door. Is Hillel here? Is Hillel here? And Hillel, all right, he gets dressed and goes to the door. What can I do for you? Okay, so first attempt at making him angry does not succeed. Okay, I have a question to ask, said he. Ask, my son, he prompted. Okay, thereupon he asked, why are the heads of the Babylonians round? This is what this guy has to ask Hillel on Friday afternoon, right? So in other words, Hillel could say, really? You're not asking me whether the chicken you're about to cook for your Shabbos dinner is kosher? You're not asking me for money to buy candles, to light candles for Shabbos? You're asking me on Friday afternoon why the heads of Babylonians are round? Really? I mean, that should be the attitude that Hillel has. Why are you bothering me with this question on Friday afternoon? But he doesn't say that. He says, the question is, why are the heads of Babylonians round? My son, you have asked a great question, Hillel says, because they have no skillful midwives. That's the answer Hillel gives. He has a pat answer. Why are the heads of Babylonian round? Because there are no skillful midwives who know how to shape the head once the head emerges as the baby is being born, right? So imagine, in hospitals today, forceps, and then you'd pull the baby out with forceps, and the baby for quite some time would have some dents in the head, or the head might be a little bit misshapen. Takes a while for the skull to reshape. So maybe Babylonians don't have good midwives and their heads stay round. Okay, whether it's true or not, who cares? Hillel took the time to answer the question. He departed, tarried a while, returned, and called out, is Hillel here? Is Hillel here? So Hillel went back to washing up, and the guy just went around the corner and came back again. So Hillel, robed, went out to him saying, my son, what do you require? I have a question to ask, said he. Ask, my son. Thereupon he asked, why are the eyes of the Palmyrians bleared? Palmyra. It was in the news a couple of years ago. ISIS destroyed a temple in Palmyra in northern Syria, right? Which ISIS throughout the Middle East has destroyed sites that are archaeological treasures, but they were pagan temples. Okay, so Palmyra, if you Google Palmyra, you'll find that it's someplace in northeastern Syria, and today, and there's some major. It was a major city, and time of the Romans, whatever. And so, why are the eyes of the Palmyrians bleared? Okay, my son, you have asked a great question. Hillel replied, because they live in sandy places. So bleared, I guess, squinty. Why the Palmyrans look like this? Okay, well, there's a lot of sand around. You want to keep the sand out. Okay, fine. Again, another question bothering Hillel on Erev Shabbos. And it's the same guy. And you would think now that Hillel's starting to get incensed, but no, it doesn't seem to be that way. He departed, tarried a while, returned, and called out, is Hillel here? Is Hillel here? Okay, so Hillel went back to washing up, and then the guy came back, and he robed, went out to him saying, my son, what do you require? I have a question to ask, said he. Ask, my son, he prompted. He asked, why are the feet of the Africans wide? Why do people from Africa have wide feet? Okay, so it is, I think the Hebrew is kushim, and kushim would, just a second, right, I'm just looking, I have the Hebrew source here. No, I'm sorry. She didn't put the whole source in the Hebrew here. So there's something in the English translation that it could be Ethiopians as opposed to a broad term of Africans. Why are people from Ethiopia, why are their feet wide? Okay, so he's asking these bizarre questions on Friday afternoon, and Hillel continues, my son, you have asked a great question, because they live in watery marshes. Okay, so I guess if you live in a watery place, you don't want to sink into the ground. It's like wearing it's like putting on snowshoes in the wintertime, so you don't sink into the snowdrift. People in Africa have wide feet so that they don't sink into the watery marsh. So now the guy, instead of leaving him alone and coming back again, says, I have many questions to ask, said he, but fear that you may become angry. Thereupon Hillel robed, sat before him and said, ask all the questions you have to ask. And the guy says, are you the Hillel who is called the Nasi of Israel, the head of the Sanhedrin? Yes, he replied. If that is you, he retorted, may there not be many like you in Israel. A bizarre thing to say for someone who's so kind to answer all his questions. There shouldn't be many like you in Israel. Why? Hillel says, because I have lost 400 zoos because of you. That you've proved to be so nice. Be careful, Hillel answered. Hillel is worth it that you should lose 400 zoos and yet another 400 zoos. Yet Hillel shall not lose his temper. You can bet all the money you want, I will never lose my temper. So it's a fun kind of story. The Talmud has a lot of fun stories like this. Did this story really happen? No. Hillel, though, had the reputation of being a patient person. Shammai had the reputation of being an impatient person. And this is just one of many stories that highlight the patience of Hillel. But getting to our point of civil discourse, Hillel always followed the dictum of you should receive a person besever panim yafot. You should always receive someone with a pleasant countenance, no matter how knowledgeable or unknowledgeable the person is. Okay, so from Dr. Hayes's perspective, the idea is that civil discourse is a rabbinic dictum, that we have to be patient with other people, we have to engage in conversation with people, and we have to do so in a respectful way. Now, the guy who is approaching Hillel, not so respectful necessarily, bothering the great rabbi on a Friday afternoon. That's not exactly the time to bother someone. But Hillel took it upon himself to follow through on his own teachings, and even on Friday afternoon to have a patient countenance and have that kind of personality. Clearly, we can talk about the whole concept of civil discourse in a variety of ways, but clearly the idea here that Dr. Hayes wanted to teach is that it is an essential Jewish value that we need to be patient with people who have an opinion that is different than ours, and that we need to engage respectfully in conversation. So that's key. Civil discourse, the emphasis is on the civil, and that in social media, even possibly, some of those news shows that are on TV during prime time, whether they're on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, depending which channel you're watching, will determine kind of the political viewpoint from which the news and the news opinions are going to be presented. So when the presidential election results were being played, I watched CNN, and they had a token conservative on the panel, right? Rick Santorum, the former senator from my home state of Pennsylvania, was the token conservative on on that panel who would agree to sit with the liberals who are on the panel. I think, I'm just bringing that as an example, I think it's a shame that that panels such as that of liberal and conservative don't really exist anymore on TV, and those panels that do, they don't have patience with each other, because that's the whole point of what supposedly good television is: people screaming at each other, as opposed to people actually talking sanely and respectfully and calmly with one another. There used to be something on 60 Minutes years ago, back in the 70s, Point Counterpoint, with two people, after they did the different news articles that they would in depth talk about. There would be, for like the last 5 minutes, this Point Counterpoint. And then Saturday Night Live made fun of it when they had Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin on, and Dan Aykroyd would call her names, making fun of the Point Counterpoint. And who knew that Saturday Night Live would be prophetic in that this is what people are doing today. So uncivil discourse is what we find ourselves in, and that is clearly not Jewish. The Jewish thing is to respect one another. And so these were just two sources of many that Dr. Hayes could bring. But the main thing that should highlight the idea of how civil discourse is an essential part of what it means to be Jewish is the fact that the Mishnah, the first collection of Jewish law, interpretations of the rabbis of the Torah to derive Jewish law, edited in the year 200 CE, contains the majority opinion and also the minority opinion. Now, why would our tradition maintain that if our tradition doesn't want to have civil discourse? So, in other words, if the point of the book of Jewish law, the Mishnah, is to teach us what the law is, then just have the majority opinion. But the point of the Mishnah is to teach us that the process in order to get to the law is just as important as the law itself. And the process involves debate. And the debate must be done respectfully, and we must maintain the opinion that ends up being the minority opinion. So, for example, I like to quote this a lot. The rabbis question whether chicken is parv or chicken is considered meat. Those of us who keep kosher know that chicken is considered meat, right? You're not supposed to mix chicken with dairy, right? You can't drink milk at a chicken dinner. You can't cook chicken with cheese, right? So chicken parmesan is not kosher. So so the rabbis question whether chicken is parv, and it's funny that they're asking that question because we all know that chicken is considered in the category of meat, but it wasn't so clear in the time of the rabbis. What are birds? What the fowl? F-O-W-L. Is that are fowl parv, or because fish are parv, but are chicken? So the question is, well, chicken might be considered parv because it's not a mammal. It's not a four-legged animal that has cloven hooves and chews its cud. So maybe only mammals are considered in the category of meat. And that's what Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, Yossi from the Galilee, thought. All the other rabbis said no, even though chickens, and that would be duck and geese and any other birds that are kosher to eat, they're all slaughtered in the same way that mammals are slaughtered. And because of that, they're in the category of meat. But Yossi HaGalili's opinion is still kept in perpetuity in the Mishnah as a minority opinion that he thought chicken is parv. So perhaps the rabbis didn't eat in his house, or perhaps Yossi HaGalili changed his mind and followed the majority opinion. But the fact that his opinion is still there in the Mishnah is a fascinating idea, that it's not, the Mishnah isn't just about the bottom line, it's more about the process of getting to the bottom line. As opposed to the classic story of Eliezer versus the other rabbis about a very mundane point as to whether a particular oven renders things pure or impure. Okay, it's a very technical. Laws of ritual purity are very technical and really don't apply in our day, because the only way to become pure is to bring an offering to the temple in Jerusalem. So since the temple doesn't exist, laws of ritual purity don't really exist anymore. The only remnant are symbolic remnants too. When we wash hands before saying Hamotzi, that's the ritual of Netilat Yadayim, of washing hands before saying Hamotzi, is a remnant of the time of wanting to be ritually pure. But again, it's just symbolic. And also, when departing a cemetery, there is a tradition to wash hands because the contact with the dead makes one ritually impure. But washing hands on departing the cemetery is, again, symbolic, because we don't have the ritual in place in order to do that. So there's extensive discussion in the Mishnah and in the Talmud about all the particulars of laws of purity. Rabbi Eliezer had a very strong opinion about this particular oven, how that particular oven was made, and the other rabbis had a different opinion. But as opposed to Yossi HaGalili, who followed the opinion of the rabbis about chicken, Eliezer did not follow the opinion of the rabbis when it came to that oven, to the point where Eliezer says, I'm going to prove to you, rabbis, that I'm right. Look out the window, see that tree over there? The tree got up out of the ground and moved and rooted itself in the ground far away. They thought, the rabbi should have thought, Eliezer must be right if he can make a miracle happen. And the rabbi said, we don't make law by miracles like that. And he performed 2 other miracles, and the rabbis still were intent in not agreeing with Rabbi Eliezer. Eliezer says, okay, if those miracles don't help, I'll have God help. And a voice from heaven came down and said, Eliezer is right. And the rabbis said, no, we don't listen to voices from heaven. So, and then Eliezer refused to give in to the rabbis, to the point that the rabbis excommunicated Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so civil discourse to the point where everybody has to agree to be civil with one another. Okay, and if you don't buy into basic etiquette and rules of how to engage in civil discourse, then you are subject to excommunication. So the story then of the story of Hillel and the guy who thought that he could get Hillel to be angry is there to show us patience that is required. The one example of Yossi HaGalili and chicken, whether it's parv or not, versus Eliezer and whether the oven imparts ritual purity or not, are counterpoint to how to engage with your fellow colleagues in meaningful dialogue about Jewish law. And engaging in dialogue means that you have to be open to the opinion of the other. And so not only is it about being respectful and patient of the other person, but it's also allowing your mind to be open to the knowledgeable opinion of the other person that you're engaging in conversation with. And if that person can convince you, or you can convince them, then that's a fruitful dialogue, and or you could agree to disagree. And Eliezer, like Yossi said, okay, I think that chicken's parv, but I disagree with you. but I can see that you're valid and will follow the opinion of the majority. That's totally fine. Eliezer lost it and refused to buy into the idea of agreeing to disagree. So civil discourse then, according to Jewish tradition, is all about that: agreeing to disagree, engaging in conversation out of mutual respect, and having patience with the other person. That's what our tradition teaches us about how to be civil in discourse with one another. Any thoughts or comments or questions? Okay, so we will close here for today. Next week, we'll end our year-long journey through the Jewish year. And I think that after the new year, I'll do a limited series class on Mondays. I'm thinking about it. I don't know for sure. It might be like a once a month instead of an every week. Like I happen to like discussions about Jewish law, and I like to look at opinions of the law committee of the conservative movement, like what the law committee thinks are important matters of the day to discuss and derive an opinion for Jewish law. So I think maybe the first Monday or the second Monday of the month, we'll have a discussion of matters of Jewish law, and I'll kind of try to find a sexier topic, a sexier title for that to understand, the relevance of Jewish law today, something like that. Okay, so next week we'll have our last journey class, where I think we'll talk about our relationship with non-Jews, since Christmas is coming, and Christmas was one time of year that rabbis had a lot to say about whether engaging in business with non-Jews before Christmas or not, and just what Christmas and also Easter meant for Jews when those holidays happened. So relationship to non-Jew, we'll talk about next week. And then after the new year, I'll send out information about our discussion about Jewish law. So have a good day, everybody. Have a good rest of the day, and see you all next week.
You too. Thank you.